Good evening, everyone. So I'm joined by Adam Wakeman, who's also known as Milton Keanes, keyboardist of the jazz band Jazz Sabbath, to talk about the new album, the 1968 tapes. So, Adam or Milton, welcome to Metal Mayhem ROC.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I think the first question off the bat, and I'm going to be doing a little plagiarizing myself from a cool thing you had on Instagram, but it's a simple question. So, is this band Black Sabbath or is it jazz? What's the answer?
Well, it's Jazz Sabbath. It's jazz, obviously. It's where it all started. It's where it all began.
That's right. And my memories, I'm 54 years old, but my memories of Milton Keanes, going back to the 80s when I was collecting bootleg tapes and concerts and swapping tapes with guys all over the world, it was always like, oh, yeah, we got this show, Ozzy and Motley Crue and, Skid Row from the Milton Keanes Bowl in the UK. So it's very coincidental that just happens to be, your name as well.
Yeah, that coincidence is because I live 10 miles from Milton Keanes, and every time I drove through Milton Keanes, I thought that would be a great jazz pianist name, and I've thought that for 20 years. And there's another place called Leighton Buzzard, which is about 15 miles away. And on the albums, whenever you see Hammond organ played, it's credited to Leighton Buzzard.
How about that, huh? Wow. That's cool backstory. Yeah, 10 kilometers or miles from Milton Keanes Bowl. Is it still a venue that's used regularly for shows?
No, not anymore. I think there's like a car auction warehouse there now. I don't think they use it for venues as a venue very often. Yeah, if at all. I can't remember there being one since I've lived here, and I've been here about 10
Wow.
years.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, a little bit on the background of Jazz Sabbath. So, of course, they were a hot band in the UK and out of the 60s scene, right? And, as the legend goes, you guys recorded several albums, but then a lot of things happened to the band, right? There were health issues, Milton Keanes, yourself, then the record label held off on the releases. Then there's a songs leaking out, like bootleg tapes getting out, getting into the wrong hands, and then sort of, I guess the material was crudely re-recorded and popularized by this band out of Birmingham that made them dark and heavy, and became kind of heavy metal versions of your songs from Birmingham. So, I mean, how did that make you feel that, there's this other band that comes in and they basically steal your material and popularize it?
I mean, they ruined everything. Absolutely ruined everything. I've spent the last 52, 53 years trying to clear my name and get myself, the recognition as the original writer of all those tunes. That's been the kind of my sole purpose for the last 55 years or 52 years. I mean, there are a couple of inconsistencies that some might pick up on this. In that Milton Keanes is technically about 85 years old, and I was born in 1974. But let's not get the truth get in the way of a good story, right? So
Absolutely.
We've done as much as we possibly can to keep the continuity with this whole project. I mean, first of all, I will say that I had the blessing of the guys when I first started this project. So I do have a good night's sleep knowing that I'm not going to get sued. But the story, the comedic backstory to it, originally started in a bar in Berlin when I was on the Black Sabbath tour, 13, and I was with a security guard who had the night off. I was sat in the bar having a drink with him, and there was nobody else in the bar, and there was a grand piano in the corner, and he said, "Oh, play the Sabbath set," and I said, "Well, I sound shit on a piano." I said, unless you kind of did it as a sort of jazz thing. So I sat down and improvised just a bit of what was then Into the Void. No, not Into the Void. Iron Man, and it was just really funny. It just made me laugh. So when I went back to my hotel room, I thought, actually, do you know what? That'd be a really cool project, is to adapt and rearrange Black Sabbath songs in the style of, in a jazz style. And I'm a big fan of sort of Dr. John and Thelonious Monk and that kind of style of piano. And I thought I could do it like that. And then I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to add a bit of comedy to it and invent this character who claims that he's written all the songs, this disillusioned pianist from the 60s. And it kind of grew from there. And and basically we've just run with the story now. So the new album, the 1968 tapes. I mean, as you so rightly said, the first two albums were lost. There was a fire at the record pressing plant, and obviously Milton Keanes had a terrible heart attack and was in hospital for some time. Um, and then, who knew there was an album that was before that, but was binned because it was deemed too experimental, and that is in fact the 1968 tapes.
Before we get into some of those songs, though, I want you to comment a little bit on the self-titled album and then Volume 2. So what happened in the storyline there? When did the tapes get rediscovered and the band got back together? Milton's health gets better. You guys finish the recordings. Like, take us through that segment of the band's career.
Okay, right. I'm going to get shot down in flames by anybody that's paid more close attention to the continuity than I have. I know Mark at the record label is going to be cursing me already because I'm going to get something wrong. But so the first album was done, pressed at the pressing plant. There was a fire. They were all destroyed. Milton Keanes then has a heart attack. When he comes out of hospital, this other band, as you say, from Birmingham, have got hold of the bootlegs and re-recorded them in this very simplistic metal fashion, and suddenly they become very popular. Nobody believes me, and I spend the next 50 years just trying to clear my name as a kind of disillusioned liar, and claim all these, get the rightful credit that Milton deserves. So and that album was suddenly found in 2020 and released, which was fantastic for Milton. And then in 2022, Volume 2 was released, which was an album that was started at the same time. I mean, not too dissimilar, if you like, to Black Sabbath, where they recorded two albums in very quick succession. Volume 2 was actually recorded at the same time, and those tapes just materialized. So we finished the recordings, put some overdubs on, and that album was basically 50 years in the making, if you like. So that album came out in 2022, and then this new album, the 1968 tapes, Milton just completely forgot about it. And it was actually the album that started the whole thing in 1968. So this predates the first album that was lost in the fire. This album, Rusty Bed Springs Records, wanted us to go into the studio and try and capture what we do live back in 1968. So we did that. We went in and we recorded these tracks. And Bernard Lavender from Rusty Bed Springs Records said that they were all shit, basically. And they said, record some of your easier stuff. This is too complicated on the ear. So it was deemed too experimental. And like any good artist, you've got to shelve that, put that to one side, and then focused on the next thing, which was what I did, and recorded the first album, Jazz Sabbath. So, and then obviously going into hospital, I completely forgot about the 1968 tape, assumed the tapes had been lost forever, and then unbelievably, earlier this year, I found them in a drawer. So there we go. So that's the new album, or the new old first album.
Say that they could have, who knows, they could have maybe been down at the Milton Keanes Bowl in like a time capsule in the ground for the last 50 years. You never know.
You never know what you might find there in the future. That is a very good point.
That's true. It's considering it's only 10 miles down the road. I like how Bernard says, quote unquote, they're just the labyrinth of noise. But um, Milton Adam, I think I've listened to the album a lot. It's great, by the way. What I think is really, really cool, and I'm sure this goes for the first two albums too, is they really do stay true to the Black Sabbath versions, but there's equally some novel, let's say, unique jazz passages that are added in, which keeps it kind of unpredictable. That's what I liked about it. Like, you get into the song and you hear segments and you're like, okay, I'm connecting the dots here. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that went out in left field. And then it comes back in, or maybe it doesn't. Or then maybe there's a surprise coming up, and we'll cover off on the tracks. But another observation I had, and maybe this is a question for you, is when you're, let's say, crafting these arrangements, I found at times the piano took on the vocal, and then at other times the piano took on the main guitar riff, and then in certain songs it did both. So how does that happen, or how does that go when you're crafting, making your arrangements?
I just sit down at a piano, I play the original, and then I see what comes out. And if the first thing that kind of feels natural is the melody, then I concentrate on the vocal melody. Songs like, Iron Man, the vocal melody is the same as the guitar riff. It's the same notes as the guitar riff. So that's fairly straightforward. That guitar riff, when it comes, it is so recognizable. It's you hear the first three chords and you know what it is. And the vocal melody follows the same thing. So that was quite obvious to do that. But with some of the other tunes, it's just what feels natural. Because what I wanted to do all the way along with these is not struggle to have to play stuff live. Obviously, it's quite complex. Some of the passages are quite complex, but it's what feels comfortable to me. I didn't want a position where I'm going to be doing live shows and potentially really struggling with sections. I wanted to make sure that it was natural, because that way we can go really off piste when we want to in the solo sections. And also, you brought up a valid point where you get the kind of hooks of certain songs and certain passages, and then it does go off piste. And that's for two reasons. One is because I didn't want it to just be like you could put the two tracks next to each other and they're the same length and it's the same chorus, verse, chorus, middle eight, or whatever. I wanted it to be familiar in some context, so you can listen to it and pick out melodies or whatever. But then for the people that aren't big Black Sabbath fans, I want to confuse people into thinking that, oh, maybe that is part of the melody, or maybe that isn't part of the melody. And then they go back and reference Black Sabbath songs and then try and work it out. So I want it to be a kind of evolving process with people. And obviously everybody listens differently. And we do these live shows where there's often somebody will shout out the name of the song as soon as they recognize it. If I haven't introduced it, because you can see them going, rat salad, it's like, and it's great. And I play the full character in live shows as well. So it's really entertaining. I love doing the live shows and I love recording the albums.
I was going to say, one of my questions is, what's the audience like? Is it mainly Black Sabbath guys in t-shirts, or do you get, I don't know, a 75-year-old husband and wife that love to go to jazz clubs and they're like, well, I don't know what this guy is. I'm just going to my local jazz theater and it's a Saturday night and I'm having dinner and some beers and I don't know who these guys are.
It's a real mix. I thought when we booked, the very first show was a festival in Italy, and I had absolutely no idea what the audience was going to be. In my head, I thought it's going to be furious metalheads. That was just because that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, pretty much. That's what I thought it was going to be. It turned out it was probably 5% curious metalheads, maybe 80% kind of just music fans, people that will go to the theatre or they go to jazz or they go to a rock thing or whatever, and then 15% of kind of really hardcore jazz, aficionados who are kind of taking notes on the mistakes.
Yeah, see that. So there you go. You alluded to the fact up at the top of the discussion that the members of the Birmingham band gave you the blessing to do this. But the second part of the question is, have they actually heard the music, maybe come to see you? What was their impression? Because, what I find interesting, Adam, on this is, again, I'm a big follower of their catalog, is they always categorize themselves as a hidden blues band at heart. That if you're really, as heavy as they were, Bill was always playing offbeat drum beats and Tony was with his chords. And when I hear your versions of them, you can really hear some of the song structures broken down where you really like, wow, that riff really is a bluesy, jazzy kind of riff.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's easier than others to make them fit. And the way that I've always worked with making these arrangements is if in 10 minutes I'm still struggling to get started, I shelve it and I pick another song. That's kind of the way it is. And the reason that I've stuck with the Ozzy era is because of not just the history with Sabbath, with Black Sabbath, and has been those guys, but because I've played those songs so many times
Yeah.
I feel that what's the right way to put it? I feel that I can do them justice because I know them inside out. I know what they are to be able to take them apart, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Maybe I would feel less qualified through the Dio era, if you know what I mean, because I haven't played those songs. It would be maybe a little bit more formulaic if I was looking at those particular tracks. So I feel kind of, I don't know. I feel I'm allowed to do this. Do you know what I mean? Not just with their. Obviously, I wouldn't have even done it. Certainly not with the comedy aspect. If any about it, but they've all given it. None of them have seen a live show. I have invited them, but there's always been things in the way. They've been away, or it hasn't been convenient, or nowhere close. Sharon did come along, and Amy, Ozzy and Sharon's daughter, came to the two shows we did in Los Angeles, which was great. That was really nice. I felt pretty nervous, I've got to say, especially character and making all these claims. I did feel a little nervous, but it was all taken in good jest.
I think that would be right up the alley of Tony, especially at this stage of his career. You know, he doesn't want to get out and do big tours, but he loves playing. And every now and again, you'll see him out there sitting on stage with somebody. But wouldn't that be nice to get him to unplug of sorts? And he brings out one of his different guitars. Maybe doesn't plug in the Gibson XG, but he brings out something else, a jazz guitar, and he sits down on a nice stool and plugs away. I think that's something you should pursue.
All live in hope.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Adam, some of the songs on the album, so there's 8 tracks on the album. Leading off the top of the album, you got Into the Void, right? It's long and epic. This is like a 9-minute version. This is one where that piano is the main riff, but then it goes into that jammy section we were talking about earlier. You got the saxophone solo coming in, really showcases the players there. And then like sort of the back end of the song kind of feels like a little sexy in a weird way. So, maybe talk about, Into the Void.
Well, I mean, the end section has absolutely nothing to do with the original song.
Yeah.
I started playing it at the end, and I thought this could have been in the song. That's the way I look at it. You know, where certain Sabbath songs, they exit on a riff that you don't hear anywhere else in the song, and any other band would have kept that riff and made another song out of it. But Tony would throw it in there at the end, and you'd go, "That's awesome! That's like the killer riff that, as I say, any other band would have made another song out of." And with that outro section, I thought this could be a cool way of people going, "Was that on the original? Was that?" And then go back and reference and go, "Hold on, I don't recognise that melody at all, or that chord structure." So that's kind of a bit of a herring at the end of that one. But I mean, the difference with this album was I used a tenor sax player just to give it a little bit more growl, a little bit more kind of, I don't know, sort of body, rather than the kind of on the previous album we had some clarinet and some soprano sax, just taking it a little bit kind of, I don't know, rawer and sexier, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was on Electric Funeral. I remember the sax as well as with trumpet and then a little bit of guitar. There was like a breakout section on a Electric Funeral, and I never think of Electric Funeral as like kind of a chill, sleepy version, but I kind of think you got it. It was like that rainy day version of Electric Funeral.
Yeah, I mean that's the yeah, I'm genuinely really proud of all these albums because I put them on to listen to them. You know, my wife's like, why are you always listening to your own music? And I was like, well, I've made it for me. You know, there's other albums I've made that I never listen to. You know, they just never crop up that I want to listen to them. But with these, this is what I love. This sort of music. I love the kind of the sections where it's just free, and then when we go and play live, it's kind of we do whatever we want. If sections, oh, and I apologise constantly to the guys in the band because you know sometimes I'll go into Snowblind during Children of the Grave, you know, just by accident, and they look over at me as if I'm some kind of, you know, I really am a 90-year-old who's forgotten where I am and my name. Um, you know, the starting point for all of that exploration comes from doing the albums, and it's yeah, it's great. I've really enjoyed the last few years of doing these albums, and then we've got quite a long tour next year and quite a lot of shows coming in, so we're yeah, it's gonna be busy.
Yeah, it sounds like, and that's what it is. I mean, you know, call yourself maybe not a jam band in a traditional sense, but you have that avant-garde opportunity that you can just not stick to the script and you move on. I mean, I think of like the song Warning on the album, right? Like this one was the hardest one for me to place because I said, I got to reacquaint myself with Warning to begin with, but then you don't make the connection with the Sabbath version right away. But it's cool. It almost feels like its own track, and then it kind of gets jazzy and like jammy a little bit in there. And then what I thought was really cool is I don't know, I'm not a musician myself, but it sounds like a Moog or some sort of synthesizer comes in and it kind of gets like atmospheric at the end and it kind of takes you out. Almost as if it's like Keith Emerson was jumping in from the spirits of Keith Emerson coming down and playing there or something.
So yeah, that's a very astute observation there, Mr. Metalwalk, sir. That's it. It was indeed a Moog. It was a Moog Little
Ah,
Fatty, and the outro section of that, oh, now I'll probably get sued for saying this, but the I wanted it to be experimental if it was in the 60s, and that would have been kind of the sort of thing that bands would have maybe done and gone into this kind of spacey, hypnotic Moog section with loads of delays and things on. And then just for good measure, I throw in a motif from somebody called Rick Wakeman, his
ah,
album King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So anybody might recognise there's just one little lick in there. So I'm working on the principle he won't sue me because he'll probably never see this, and he probably won't listen to the album. But if he does, I'll expect a phone call from his lawyer.
I don't know who that guy is, so I'm not going to tell him myself.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
um, Adam, what about a couple of the other tracks? Let's see here. The Wizard, you do the Wizard, you know, got this cool, you know, funk to it. Supernaut, right? You got a trumpet in Supernaut, and then of course you end it with the epic War Pigs, where that's one of those songs where you have like the vocal, you know, complementing the piano as the vocal and the main guitar riff. It's very jazzy. It's cool. And then what I like at the end, and I picked up on it only because I had my earbuds in, was there's a coughing sound at the end, which I don't know what that is, but that sounds to me like on the next album, there's going to be a certain song called Sweet Leaf on there.
Well, you're the first person to pick up on that. So good spotting. When it was being mixed, the I went out for a coffee and I came back, and Gary Stevenson, who mixed the record, he just sort of played that end section because I wanted that to just be the big finale of the album, and I was like, mate, you've missed something. You've missed the coffin. He goes, oh, I got rid of that. I thought that was a mistake. And I was like, of course it wasn't a mistake. There's no vocals. So there wouldn't be a kind of, you know, there wouldn't be a vocal mic left open. I was like, it's on there for a reason. And he's not a huge Black Sabbath fan, so he doesn't know the reference. But yeah, it's a nice subtle reference there. And who knows? I mean, people are finding master tapes all the time. So
You never know. You never know. So you did say you're doing some touring. I see there's dates out there for early 2025 in the UK and the EU. We're an American audience, but to talk about your upcoming tour. And aside from those 2 LA gigs, have you, I mean, I feel like I would have known about it if you played New York, but do you plan to get out and maybe do 10, 15 shows in the States?
Would love to. Now, when we did the LA shows, it was tagged on really to the end of a tour I was doing with Uriah Heep. I sat in them with their keyboard player for a couple of months, so it was the perfect opportunity. I was already in America, and then I picked up Tal Bergman and Tim Landers, fantastic drummer and bass player from LA, to come and do those shows. So we had a rehearsal and did those 2 shows. Now, the problem is those guys are super busy. I was just very lucky and fortunate that they were around at that time for those 2 shows. I'd love to use them for a longer tour for 2-3 weeks. The biggest problem is finding an agent that understands what this is all about. I mean, we book pretty much, myself and the record company. We book the shows in the UK through my small management company, purely because I know all the venues. I know, like you would in New York. I know every venues that have real pianos in the UK or if not, I can find them. And then the record label books a lot of the European stuff. And then there's a few promoters that have come on board and taken us for Australia. But the US, I've really struggled with finding an agent that will take it on because I think they don't quite understand is it comedy, is it jazz, is it metal, is it what, but what I've found is everywhere is like that until we play there. And then people understand it. They get the fact that the music is very credible. There is a comedic side to it. It's entertainment. I want people to laugh. I want people to really get off on the music and the musicianship. So there will be shows for sure. I've just got to get it right so that we can make it work out. Sort of financially, that's always a big issue. Is getting visas are so prohibitively expensive for UK music. People to work in the US. It's the best part of probably $10,000 to get the visas for the guys to come over for a period of time. So it has to be financially worthwhile. But yes, short answer in a very long fashion is yes, we will be doing some shows as and when. I'm not quite sure.
Yep. But you do have dates coming up outside of the States in the beginning of 2025, and all the tour dates are up on your website. So Adam, talk about the merchandise, because I mean, your website's great. I mean, number one, some amazing videos, backstory, and the comedic nature of this, but also your merchandising is great, and it's a great way to stay, because we understand how much of a challenge it is for artists to sell material. But your product, I don't own any of it yet, but it looks great because you have the storylines on the back cover, the images on the front. You're selling vinyl, you're selling CDs, you're selling cassettes. There's bundle packages that have tour postcards, probably other stuff I don't even know about. Talk about some of them, or plug your merchandise. Tell us some of the stuff that maybe you want to get out there for the listeners to know about.
Well, even if you can't get along to a show, you can get everything from the web store. So everything jazzsabbath.net. There's a link on there. We'll take you to the store to be able to see what we've got there. The T-shirts are a pretty mainstay. The design is so good. Mark Vandenhoven, who from Black Lake Records, does the design work and is so brilliant. I mean, I've got to give him so much credit because we would go back and forward when we first started this this conversation. He wasn't really keen to begin with to take it on because I think he was worried he couldn't do it justice. I, however, have worked with him before with another project, and I knew he would be perfect because he's a fantastic designer, and nothing comes out of there unless it's absolutely brilliant. There's never anything rushed. He spends his time. The album artwork on all 3 albums is superb. On the record store day versions is superb. And it's true to the era. He did a lot of research about the sort of the Blue Note records from the sort of 60s. And just to make sure it fitted and felt right from that era. And that's kind of crossed over with the merch items. We chat about it quite a lot, about whether it's worth doing this on a T-shirt, whether it's worth doing that. And we went to Australia and we did a different sort of run of a line of merchandise there. So we had hoodies there. which you can get from the Australian web store. So they've still got some stock of those over there. We're going to go back to Australia at the end of next year. So that'll be good. But the merch stuff is, for bands these days, to be able to sell vinyl and CDs and make money is a rarity these days. We're on a very small level of touring, so it's we have to be very, everything has to be cost effective and planned quite carefully to make sure that we make money. But the fact that people like to buy a physical product of this is fantastic. I've got friends that have got bands that in a different kind of genre who struggle to sell anything merchandise because the age group is maybe different and the way that people buy stuff is different. I mean, I've noticed lots of bands I've worked with over the years, their merchandise the branding is very specific to the artist. And if you get that wrong, you end up with a warehouse full of stuff. I've seen bands making, cups with their faces on. They all get broken and they end up in a warehouse because, that's just not the sort of thing. I worked with an artist whose fan base was pretty much middle-aged housewives. So his biggest selling item was a pin. It was like an apron with his face on. A bit of marketing,
Yeah.
And he nailed it, and that was the biggest thing. But can you imagine an Ozzy apron? It's not really. It wouldn't be a big. Whereas a black T-shirt with flames on the back, flying out the door. You know your market, and we're trying to keep the quality as high as possible, and maintain the kind of brand imaging as best we can.
That's good. That's good stuff. Well, we'll make sure that your website and all the credentials are up there, your socials, and that's where everybody can buy the material. The album comes out. It's on the 29th of November is the release date for the 1968 tapes, correct?
So the album's out that day. There's also Record Store Day version as well, which is a coloured vinyl. So depending on what you're interested in, you can buy the original version or you can buy the Record Store Day version. On that day, you have to, I think, pre-order at your record stores, or if you want to get the regular version, you can come to the website and get it from there.
Great. Well, Adam, this is a great hour with you. Before I let you go, I want to ask you a couple questions about the Uriah Heep tour. We have a great story of Metal Mayhem ROC. We were guests of Saxon for the Englewood, New Jersey show. I don't know if you remember that one well. It was a Friday night, and we know Biff and Nigel quite well. A little bit of competition here because, listen, the bands were both great. I'm not going to take anything away, but we were talking to Biff before the show, and he says, Metal Walt, he goes, it's finally nice to meet in person. You've interviewed us a couple of times. Why don't you come out back at the tour bus afterwards? So they went on first that night. You guys went on second. And then right after your set was over, 5 after 11, we knock on the tour bus and away we went. And Biff held court for about 2 hours, drinks in abundance. I had to be careful because I had to drive home, but it was a great night. But I do remember there's some funny lines. I said, well, where are the Heap guys? Where are they? And they said, those guys, they sleep in hotels. They don't rough it like us.
The weirdest thing, I've never done a tour like that where we had a tour bus, but we would stay overnight in a hotel and then drive on the day. I've done hundreds of these tours where you're on a bus, and it's the best thing about a bus tour is that you sleep on the bus, you wake up, you're rested, you look out the window, you're in a different county. I love kind of that thing. But for a couple of the the Heap guys, they were Bernie and Mick basically don't sleep well on the bus. So because there were quite a lot of shows, they wanted to be, rested. And it was an unusual way to tour. But what did happen, it meant that we stayed at the venues till really late, getting absolutely hammered, and then get on the bus, drive 10 miles to a hotel, fall into bed, and then get up at 7 and then spend the rest of the day on the bus. So it was
I don't know. That sounds pretty good to me, actually.
I mean, I'm happy with whatever, but I mean, the good thing about the bus is that when we did do a few nights on the bus, and it was, you then get to spend more time with the crew and the people you're working with. Otherwise, you don't tend to.
Yeah.
You don't.
Was the tour good for you? I mean, I guess the question was, did you enjoy that tour, and will you be touring with them on their farewell tour, or was this just a one-stop shop and then Phil comes back and into the fold.
Phil wasn't able to do that tour. It was a one time only. I was just covering for him for those 7 weeks or so, and yes, I loved it. It was a great laugh. I'd recently done a show with Deep Purple when Don was sick just before Christmas, so it was a very last minute kind of festival that I was covering for, and it was great. It was like, you know, two of the kind of best Hammond gigs that you could do. Yeah. Not long after each other, so it was great. Yeah, it was good. I've got my Hammond over here in the studio, and it was nice to fire it up and do some practicing on it.
Well, I was going to ask you about that gig because I'm a big Deep Purple fan. I follow all the way up to their newest album. They played here in Jersey a couple of months ago. It was a great show with Yes. But what was that experience like? You played India. I mean, Simon McBride, new guitar player. I mean, how do you just step in? You know, maybe a rehearsal or two. You got 15 songs to learn, and you're going halfway across the world. How do you make that work? And I wouldn't be sleeping if that was me.
There's rehearsals, that's for sure. It was very last minute. It was a festival, so I actually had about a week's notice. No, I had 10 days notice. Now, Simon McBride phoned me first. I'd worked with Simon in a band called Snake Charmer with Neil Murray and Laurie Wisefield and Harry James. So we had a band all together. We did a couple of albums, about 10 years ago. So I've known Simon for quite a while. And he phoned me and just said, "Look, you're going to get a phone call." He said, "You're on a short list of a couple of players that have been mentioned about covering for Don because he's not well enough to fly, or the doctors advised him against flying. He's absolutely fine, but didn't want to take that risk for whatever the reason was." So I was kind of, I was like, obviously the answer is yes. When is it? And he said, it's in 10 days' time, which was the 20th of December. Now, the following morning, I was leaving on a Jazz Sabbath European run for 8 days, which meant I had no time to really prepare. And so all I did was listen to the set over and over again in a van driving around Europe doing the Jazz Sabbath shows. And then whenever I got a minute, I had a little portable keyboard. I'd get out in the hotel and I'd start working through stuff. And then when I got back home, I had a day on my Hammond organ to just really get it together. Flew to India. I had a day before the show. I had the keyboard in my room, just went through it over and over again. Went down to the venue, went through a couple of the tunes with everybody. Ian Pace just said, we got to the last tune. He said, "Everything good? Right, see ya." And then just got up and left. There was no sort of going back and finding bits or going through everything. So, and then the next thing was, the following day was the show in front of 40,000 people or whatever it was. But it was great. And they said, "Are you happy to do a solo?" I was like, "Yeah, how long?" And they're like, 10, 15 minutes. I was like, "Great, okay, off we go." So I did prompt you got a 10, 15 minute Hammond and piano. I did a little tip of the hat to one of my dad's pieces. I played a little bit of one of the Six Wives of Henry VIII, and then went back to a bit more John Lord and Don Airey sort of special.
That's awesome stuff, Adam. It was funny. I sent out a request to listener questions. I said I'm going to be speaking to Adam Wakeman. So, of course, I get one that came back as, I have a question for Adam about his dad. I said, okay, here we go. A question probably been asked 1,000 times before, but maybe this one hasn't. And this is the question, Adam. From the listener, Mark Ballow in Kearney, New Jersey, wants to know what your childhood birthdays were like. He wants to know, was your dad like blowing up balloons and wearing a clown costume because he is a funny guy? And were all the guys of Yes, Chris Grier and Alan White and Tony Kaye and everybody else, John Anderson, were they at your party with, blowing kazoos and, tripping over cake?
I would love to say that that's what it was like, but without going too far into family, my mum and my dad divorced when I was about 3 years old. So I lived with my mum and my stepfather John, and then visited my dad weekends when he wasn't on tour. So it was quite a kind of slightly schizophrenic childhood in that I'd have a very, very stable, normal upbringing with my mum Ros and my stepdad John. And then when I go and see my dad, it would be him playing at Wembley Arena or going out to Texas and he's playing out there or whatever with one of the incarnations of Yes. So the times that we actually had sort of birthday parties were generally with my mum, my stepdad, and it was very sort of normal. We had a couple of occasions where my dad would sort of, take over a leisure centre for the afternoon, so we could, have a few friends swimming and all the sort of kid stuff. But predominantly, I'm sad to say for your listener there who asked the question that it was a fairly normal, mundane upbringing for me, and until the odd weekend when things got a bit crazy.
Well, that's okay. Hey, normal is okay too. Well, Adam, this has been a great hour. Really enjoyed speaking to you. Best of luck with the 1968 tapes. Just a reminder, get up to our website, metalmayhemroc.com, and join our community. Sign up for our email newsletter and stay up to date on new podcast episodes such as this. YouTube channels for our interviews, and make sure you go and listen to our radio show on Metal Devastation Radio on Monday nights. And if you like what we're doing, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, as this is the best way to get feedback from our listeners. So for today, my guest, Adam Wakeman. I'm Metal Walt, and this has been Metal Mayhem ROC.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.